About another theme that Jesus talked about. Last time we looked at the theme of death and resurrection. There are things that we have to die to if we want to, experience the fullness of life. And another thing that Jesus talked about was seeing and not seeing. Light and darkness. The ability to see and blindness. And there were people who should have been able to see, said that they could see. Some of these people were religious people. Some of these people were priests. But Jesus said that they couldn't see, that they were blind. And there were many blind people. And Jesus performed miracles where he opened the eyes of the blind. Now he did that physically, but he also opened the spiritual eyes of people. And some people could see. Those who have eyes to see, let them see, and ears to hear. But he spoke in riddles, in parables. A lot of people didn't see. So what we're doing here is thinking about change and what helps us to be able to change. And last week we thought about our belief systems, our worldview beliefs, the way we see the world works. And the way we see the world working, what we believe to be true about it, influences whether or not it's easy for us to change or whether we get stuck. Well, another thing that influences whether we get stuck or whether we're able to change is the concept of insight. And insight is about being able to see into something. And what it is that we need to be able to see into is our current situation. Where do we stand? What are we like? What is the environment like? What's wrong? What needs to change? What strengths have we got? Who can help us? What limitations are there? It's easy to get stuck if we become confused about some of these issues. You might have had times in your own life where you've had a kind of a vague notion that something's wrong, but you're not really quite sure what it is. Or you might have had that rather frustrating situation where you know something's wrong with somebody else and you wish they would change, but they can't see it. They think it's okay. Insight is the ability to see into the current situation. Vision is the ability to see a future situation that doesn't exist yet, that you want to create. But insight is the vision of what's here right now. And if we can't see our problems, and if we can't see the opportunity that lies in front of us, we're going to be like a lot of those people in Jesus' time. Jesus could see the problem. Jesus could look inside their heart. But they couldn't see their own problems. And they couldn't see the opportunity that was being offered to them. So being able to see into our situation is very important, and to be realistic about it. Now here we are in this church this morning, and what do you see right here, right now, as you look in the reality of this moment of our lives? What do you see? Well, I can see most of you are looking at me, which is a good thing at this present time. But you know, we are here in this present moment, and we've all got our eyes open, and we're all seeing, but what you see is different from what I see. Because you are looking this way, and you can see what's behind me, that I can't see that. But I can see things that are behind you that you can't see. So when we see each other, when we see circumstances, when we see realities in our lives, we each have our own perspective. And that perspective includes things, but it also excludes things. So if we're trying to get an understanding of what our current reality looks like, we are able to see things, and we've got other things that we're not able to see. Our perspective shapes our view of reality. And so it's important, if we're going to try and get an insight, that we know how to look at multiple perspectives. Some people aren't very good at that. They're good at their own perspective, and they are absolutely convinced that they're right. I heard an interesting quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson a week ago. And he said, some people know enough to be absolutely convinced that they're right, but they don't know enough to know that they're wrong. We can be absolutely convinced of our opinion, because our opinion might be based on our perspective. And someone else might look at the same situation and see something different. And so the ability to have insight requires us to broaden our perspective, to include other perspectives, to be open in our mind and in our thinking to what other people see, and to evaluate it, to make up a composite kind of a picture. And we haven't got time to go into it, but one of the things that we need to be looking for are patterns. Patterns in what people see. I'm not going to say more about that, but there's a lot in that, looking for patterns. Because we've got to try and work out what is real and what is true about these different perspectives. And there may be differences, but there can also be lots of similarities. And when you see lots of similarities, you're probably getting closer to what is really going on. But we have to be careful, because our perspective looks so real to us, looks so true. But we can be wrong, or we can at least be partially wrong, and we probably almost always are partially wrong. I want you to help me paint a picture. We're going to get a board this big, a canvas, all right? And I want you to get a paintbrush, a big thick paintbrush, and dip it in the black paint. Because this is not going to be a terribly interesting picture, I've got to warn you, I'm not a particularly good artist. But we're going to get our black paint, and we're going to paint all the way across this canvas. Okay? And now we've got a canvas that's completely covered in black paint. Now I want you to get a very, very fine brush with just a little, very, very fine hairs at the end. And I want you to dip it into some light blue paint, some like cyan coloured paint. And we might mix in a little tiny bit of yellow, just a smidge of yellow. And then we might put in a little bit of white. We're going to mix that around. Now once you get that paint, and just ever so carefully, just make a little tiny dab on the black surface. Not much more than the size of a grain of rice. And there we have our painting. In 1977, a couple of spaceships took off from Cape Canaveral. These spaceships are now about 20 billion kilometres away from Earth. These were the Voyager spaceships. In 1990, one of them had reached as far as Pluto. I mean, it was at Pluto in 1990, 30 years ago. It's still going. And it did a flyby of Pluto, and the cameras on board took all these lovely photographs of the surface from a few thousand kilometres away. And it was due to sail out of the solar system into interstellar space. But just before it headed off, the scientists decided to turn the camera around to look back at the sun. What does the sun look like from Pluto? That was what they were interested to know. Interesting question. So they turned it around and they took some photos. And the sun looks like a star. It looks like a bright star, but it looks just like a star. And they took a few more photos. And when they got these photos and they started looking at them, there was one photo that caught their attention and that, in a way, changed our perspective forever. The photo was given the name of the pale blue dot, because there on the black canvas of space there was a tiny little dot, not much bigger than a grain of sand. And that little dot is the Earth. From Pluto, the Earth looks like a little tiny dot, a speck in the blackness of space. And yet every human being that has ever lived has come from that little tiny dot. Every book that's ever been written, every story that's ever been told, every famous person who's ever walked on the earth anywhere has come from that little pale blue dot. Now that was 30 years ago. And that Voyager has kept on going. It travels at about 70,000 kilometres an hour. And for the last 30 years, it's just kept going. They estimate that it will go for billions of years. Maybe long after everything's stopped here on this planet and nothing's alive anymore, that machine that humans have made will still keep going. And it's unlikely to ever hit anything. You know, we look out at space, we look in the sky at night, we think about planets, we think about stars. There are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. There are at least 100 billion other galaxies that we know about in the universe. But if we were to get all of these stars, some of them are absolutely gigantic. Our sun is 1 million times bigger than the Earth. And we got all of these stars together and we put them all in one place. All of the matter of the universe. Scientists tell us that all of that stuff, if we accumulated and put it all together, would not take up more than 5% of the universe. Our problem is, from a perspective point of view, that we live on the surface of a planet. Everything we ever do and everything that constitutes our lives is about stuff, material stuff. And it all looks so normal to us. We're made of it, we eat it, we breathe it, we see it, we hear it. Our lives are consumed by it. Ask most people what reality is. It's what they see on TV, what they see going on around them in their workplace, in their street, in their family. This is reality. It's about what you eat, where you go, how much money you've got. And yet all of the matter in the universe constitutes not more than 5%. Matter is not the norm, matter is the exception. Nothingness is the norm. But nothing is not nothing. All of the blackness of space is filled with stuff. It's just stuff we can't see. You know, as Christians, God lets us into an insight, an understanding. That there's more going on than we can see. Reality is more than just this stuff that we can see and it consumes most people's lives. There's a bigger story. It's God's story. Some people, many people, you know, they just ignore this God story because they can't see it and they can't touch it. They think it's not real. And they can't see or touch 95% of the universe. But it's real. It's there. So we need to get our insight right. We need to get our understanding right. And recognise that there's a lot more going on than what we can see. And there's a much bigger story that we're a part of.